I am delighted to introduce Mr. Bjorn Kettels, Director, Goethe-Institut, Mueller Bhavan Mumbai. He studied linguistics and German literature, as well as sociology, political science, and pedagogics in Aachen and Bonn. Mr. Kettels has been working with the Goethe-Institut since 2006. He had 2 years training at the regional headquarters for Northern Africa, the Middle East in Cairo, Egypt, followed by his position as director at the Goethe-Institut in Khartoum, Sudan. Mr. Kettels has been director of the Goethe-Institut Sri Lanka in Colombo from 2010 to 2015. After working for 3 years in the cultural department of the Goethe-Institut's head office in Munich, he became the director of the Goethe-Institut Mueller Bhavan Mumbai in March 2019. Bjorn, may I request you now to come on stage and introduce the next event?
Thank you, Jayashri, and also thank you very much, Ambassador Walter Lindner and Berthold, for your insights and also the kind acknowledgement of the Goethe-Institut Mueller Bhavan's work in Mumbai. And also a very good evening, everyone here at the Tata Theatre. When I started working in Mumbai in March this year, the preparations for the 50-year celebrations were in full swing already. And this was a great opportunity for me to familiarize myself with the history of our institute here and the role it played over 5 decades in the cultural and intellectual life of the city. I feel honored to be a part of this legacy now, and I'm very much looking forward to the years of working here to come. The film we've shown in the beginning gives quite a good impression on how broad the spectrum of themes we dealt with was and is, and what has been achieved in collaboration with our many partners in Mumbai. But if you try to cover 50 years, there is always blanks and important voices are left out. There is many more stories to tell, but although we extended the originally planned 10 to 12 minutes of the film to have an hour already, we were still not able to cover it all. We are celebrating our Golden Jubilee with a 3-day festival starting tonight, with the aim to acknowledge the role played by different individuals, institutions, and partners over the years in shaping the work of our institute in Mumbai. And again, we had to select because the network we have built in all the various fields of our activities is very wide and diverse. It includes German language teaching and educational cooperation with schools and universities, translation programs of literature, poetry, and theater plays into German, and a big number of Indian regional languages, as well as collaborations and co-productions with various individuals and institutions from the arts and cultural scene in Mumbai and beyond. And as important the heads of the institutes might be, you, as our distinguished guests tonight, or most of you, mirror this rich and diverse network of partners. And although I'm only here for a little bit more than half a year now, I'm happy to see so many familiar faces, and I would like to thank you all for coming and celebrating with us. Beside our network of partners, and the film shows that impressively as well, the other big resource of our success is the staff of MMB. Networks have to be maintained, projects have to be planned and carried out, language courses have to meet our international standards and our customers' needs, and as a precondition of all of that, the administration has to run smoothly. Our team at Goethe-Institut Mueller Bhavan is ensuring all of that in an extremely professional way and with a lot of warmth and team spirit. A big thank you to all of you, and this includes also our previous staff members. I'm happy that many of them have made to join us tonight. This weekend, we are celebrating you as well. I would also like to thank my predecessor, Dr. Martin Welde, who conceptualized and prepared a big part of our anniversary program prior to my arrival, and built the foundations for many other of our activities happening this year. And of course, I would like to thank our host for tonight's event, the NCPA. Mr. Santuk and his team are celebrating in 2019 their Golden Jubilee as well, and an ensemble of SOI musicians will contribute to the festive spirit of this evening. Heartfelt congratulations and thank you very much. Now it's time to proceed with tonight's program. And it's a great pleasure for me to invite a great thinker and scientist to come to the stage who is nothing less but an icon in the field of humanities. Homi K. Bhabha is the Anna F. Rothenberg Professor of the Humanities in the English and Comparative Literature Department at Harvard University. He was founding director of the Humanities Center, later the Mahindra Humanities Center at Harvard University. He held the position of the Senior Advisor on the Humanities at Harvard University and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Bhabha is the author of numerous books and works exploring postcolonial theory, cultural change, contemporary art, and cosmopolitanism. With the support of Volkswagen and Mellon Foundation, Bhabha is leading a research project on the global humanities. He was awarded degrees and honorary doctorates from various universities, including the Free University Berlin, as well as prestigious prizes like the Humboldt Research Prize. And last but not least, he is for many, many years a friend of the Goethe-Institut. Welcome, Professor Homi Bhabha.
Good evening, friends. I can't see most of you here, so I'm sure there are some of my enemies here too. And I welcome you too, in the spirit of my talk, which is about why one has to talk with one's friends, but one is also to talk with one's enemies. And as Hannah Arendt once said, talking about her notion of alterity or otherness as an internal dynamic, she said, when I go home every evening, there is always an inconvenient friend waiting for me who questions what I did during the day. I want to thank you all for being here today. In particular, of course, I would like to acknowledge and thank both the Ambassador Linda and the Regional Director, Bertolt Franke. I would like to thank Bjorn Kettles, Amruta Nemivant, with whom I had many interesting conversations about what I might do and say today. I want to remember very warmly Martin Welder, who I had to disappoint on many occasions. And on the occasion on which I'm here, he isn't here. Is that right? Martin, wherever you are today, I will raise a glass to you later on. And I want to also remember my friend Hans-Georg Kopf, who was the director of the Goethe-Institut in Chicago when I taught at the university there, and subsequently I was his guest many times at the House of World Cultures and also at the annual meeting of the Goethe-Institut outside Munich, in a very beautiful place outside Munich. Now, as you know, Ambassador Lindner has a full head of 1960s hair with a ponytail. I also had it once. I have no hair. Mr. Franke took off his tie. If any of you have any suggestions of which part of my clothing I should remove, please let me know. But I also want to be with these cool cats, you know, and I don't know how to do it. But your suggestions will be most helpful. I want to start today with a few lines from Toni Morrison's novel Paradise. Because Toni Morrison, who, as you know, passed away earlier this year, was a very good and close friend, but always an inspiration to me. And although it won't be immediately apparent why I cite these lines, I think you will come to understand as I speak why they are important to what I have to say today. And much more than anything I have to say, why they are so significant for the world we live in. Toni Morrison wrote, "The visionary language of the doomed reaches heights of linguistic ardor with which the language of the blessed and the saved cannot compete. It is a great pleasure for me to contribute to the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Goethe-Institut, Mueller Bhavan in Bombay, and I thank you for doing me this honor. Anniversaries are occasions for celebration and reflection, remembrance and resurgence, and I shall attempt to observe these contrasting tones and themes in my talk this evening. Speaking in two voices at once, contradictory voices at one moment, convergent voices at another, is central to the great dialectical method of German arts, letters, and music. Dialectical method is an intimidating phrase, like many German words and concepts. But once you adopt German words and phrases in everyday speech, you sound so impressive that you develop an unenviable reputation like mine of being an impresario of the obscure. The complexity of German thought is profoundly clarifying, in fact. You have only to listen to Bach to understand the magic of dialectical art and music. Counterpoint and polyphony work with each other and against each other to produce sublime music from voices that are harmonically interdependent, as in polyphony, yet independent in rhythm and contour. If Bach is the beatific side of the dialectical, Hegel, that other great dialectician, is an eternal hassle. And yet, if you tear out your hair reading Hegel, as I have frequently done, which is why I'm in this sorry state at the moment, unlike the ambassador, you begin to understand that the process of reasoning, the actual process or the practice of reasoning, with all its back and forth, its stylus, tug and pull, is as significant as the end point of your thought. The means are every bit as valuable as the ends. The very tensions and contradictions of opposing states of meaning and being, negations and sublations, theses and antitheses, are partially resolved in an architecture of new ideas and axioms. Or if you prefer, you can just clear your head of Hegel and simply listen to Rilke's Poetic Reasoning to see how the paradoxes of dialectical thinking define our personal predicaments as friends and lovers, neighbors and foreigners, selves and others. Rilke writes, "Once the realization is accepted that even between the closest human beings, infinite distances continue, a wonderful living side by side can grow if they succeed in loving the distance, in loving the distance, in loving the difference between them, which makes it possible for each to see the other whole against the sky." Paradoxes abound in this statement, in this poetic statement, but so does a kind of fragile perfectibility. The distance between human beings defines their closeness, and living hospitably side by side creates new intimations of wholeness. Human proximity and cultural solidarity is based on the acceptance then and negotiation of paradoxes, things that we don't immediately understand but grow to learn and love, and indeed minority differences, differences of race and religion, ideology and sexuality, belief and belonging. When Rilke talks of distance, he is also, I believe, talking of cultural, social, and political differences. To drown out the dignity of difference in the demand for cultural homogeneity and hierarchy defined by majorities and their tyrannical trumpet majors establishes implacably hostile distances between individuals and communities. My deep dive into dialectics, dear friends, has two simple aims. First, to applaud the Goethe-Institut and the Mueller Bhavan for generously disseminating the riches of the German language, its art and its thought in our city, our state, and the nation. And I want an applause for that. My second purpose is to emphasize the importance of dialectical thinking for democratic dialogue. Dialectical thinking, as I've argued, demands an open-minded interaction with what might seem to be contradictory or paradoxical. What is foreign to our thinking and our beliefs, or what might seem different to our personal or cultural dispositions, these are the problematic and productive places from which we must begin to negotiate our neighborly, side-by-side relation to ourselves and others. And in this moment of sharp divisions, of tribal nationalisms, of populist barbarisms, it is very difficult to do, and yet we have to begin with what we don't understand, even if we don't accept it. We have no alternative. Dialectics refuses to take things at face value. It insists that it is only by looking beyond or within the surface of peoples or things that other faces appear, other facts and facets of human life and human history appear, and although they may not mirror our faces, they are indeed faces in their own right, and they must be acknowledged as faces in their own right, and they must be engaged with in the most generous spirit of side-by-side solidarity. Humanists believe in the dialectical method because we believe that the demonstration of knowledge as teaching and learning, as civic discourse and public reason and public service demands a right to interpretation, an openness towards what we don't understand at first, an openness that is dialectical, not merely the free access of information. Interpretation is as much of an important right as the right to free speech. The right to interpretation enshrines the value of knowledge as decided and judged through democratic dialogue, not the didacticism of orthodoxy, nor the dogmatism of imposed meaning and morality brought upon us by power and authority. What you can say or not say, what you can think or not think. That is the death of interpretation. And after all, think about it. Culture is about interpretation. Performance is about interpretation. Textual analysis is about interpretation. Everything we do with texts, with music, with visuality, with art, as humanists, is interpretation. And interpretation is not a second-order activity. It is a first-order activity without which the text, the music, the dance would not itself be given its embodied character. And because we believe in the demonstration of knowledge in the public sphere, as I've just said, as the right to interpretation and explanation, we also believe in the right of the people to demonstrate in the public sphere, to claim their right to have rights, to use Hannah Arendt's unforgettable and essential phrase. With Hannah Arendt, I believe, and I quote her, that finding the right words at the right moment, quite apart from the information or communication they may convey, is action. Only sheer violence is mute. In this Arendtian sense, the humanist's belief in speaking or writing the right words at the right time, playing the right notes at the right time, in the right tempi, is at once an exercise in performative or intellectual clarity, as it is a practice of ethical integrity and indeed social and political agency. The right measure of language signifies the respect and care that we demonstrate towards others in places and predicaments quite different from our own. The right to interpretation, which signifies the force of dialectical thinking, as I've been arguing, is denied to those treated with violence and therefore made mute. When they raise their voices to claim their rights and representations, they're silenced by salacious personifications. Mexican asylum seekers at the US border are characterized as rapists and murderers, only for legally seeking asylum. Muslims and Dalits in India are often accused on the flimsiest evidence, if any, of cow slaughter. Independent Turkish academics and musicians are imprisoned for exercising, indeed, their right to interpretation. The catastrophic language that populist leaders use to vent their wrath against minorities, refugees, migrants, dissidents, are speech acts of degradation that bear a close resemblance to what the moral philosopher Avishai Margalit regards as the essence of humiliation. He writes, "It is a rejection from the human commonwealth, and it consists of behaving as if the person were an object or an animal. Such rejection typically consists in treating humans as subhuman. It is by finding, my friends, the right words at the right time that Angela Merkel was able to take salient and exemplary action, the link between word and action, the right word at the right time. Angela Merkel was able to take salient and exemplary actions to turn the tide during the Mediterranean wave of death." The language of degradation, we know, leads to violence. And I believe the language of degradation is exterminatory. It is not simply a mischaracterization. It is saying, as Avishai Margalit says, these people do not belong in the world. They're objects, they're animals, they're subhuman. And if you think about it, that was Hannah Arendt's strongest argument against Eichmann. She said, "You deserve your fate because you felt that there was a group of people who could not exist alongside you, who could not exist in the world." And that, of course, my friends, is the very basis of the Genocide Convention. Hannah Arendt's injunction, finding the right words at the right moment, quite apart from the information or communication they may have, is an action, finds a new life in Nalini Malani's digital practice of iPad animations. Her art practice has deployed the right to interpretation across a range of media and materials in her career-long attempt to portray what she calls history's hieroglyphs, the everyday lives of laborers in Loharchal, the filial terror of domestic daughters in bourgeois homes, the mythic narratives of social and psychic traumas on a national scale. Her recent iPad works, and this is a quote from Arendt, her recent iPad works that foreground this 50th anniversary celebration are particularly interesting to me because they are digital in two senses of the word. Their digitality belongs to the world of computer technology, the material, they're digitally generated, but they're also digital in the traditional sense of the artist's hand, her finger drawings, to be precise, in the making of the image. For Melanie, finding the right image and the right citation, can I have the next slide, please? For Melanie, finding the right image and the right citation is more than informational. It is formational. It is a formation. I think this doesn't have the whole slide. There's a figure here reminiscent of the Lohar Chal drawings, and there is another face, but still. The movement of the hand traces an image, but in the action of drawing as a process, as a dialectical process, she creates a side-by-side relationship in the Rilkean sense, which I just talked about, between her drawing and Hannah Arendt's writing. Melanie explores Arendt's text. To be alive means to live in a world that preceded one's own arrival and will survive one's departure, by placing her drawings at an angle to the writing. And of course, this phrase from Arendt is as much about the ecological crisis or the environmental crisis as it is indeed about reconstructing the world after disaster and catastrophe. By placing her drawing at an angle to the writing, Nalini Melani creates a tension between them. In a way, the tension, the dialectical moment, is in that space in between, that intangible space where nothing exists except what exists is the way in which we, as interpreters, enter that space and actually move across it and around the entire frame to make the connection between Arendt and Melani. Now, Nalini has very kindly sent me a reading of this work, which I will briefly talk about. She says it's a black and white charcoal wall-filling drawing, is about the new world order that we inhabit, which connects life in computer language. She says that the diagram almost deletes human existence, and she says that the man on the left, who you can't see, which is why I'm particularly reading that, is holding the globe with a broken wing while a military helicopter surveys frightened refugees. This is being watched by a young girl whose innocence is shattered. It is the translational relation that happens in that space in between as we move in a dialectical way, back and forth, where the process of moving back and forth is every bit as important in the construction of meaning than any perspective you get by standing in one place, so to speak. That is the translational space. And I find it compelling in Melani's deft exposition that I've just read, and it makes explicit the idea of the diagrammatic drawing as it relates to Arendt's invocation of planetary care. We are the stewards of the earth, not its sovereigns. We should be its caretakers, not its consumers. This Rilkean side-by-side existence of drawing and text opens up a distance in between them and carves out a virtual space. It is a space generated neither by the drawing nor by the writing. The side-by-side existence of drawing and text opens up a distance in between them and carves out a virtual space. It is a space generated neither by the drawing nor the writing, but starts and stands between them, beckoning the viewer to circulate between art and philosophy. Again, the coming together in a dialectic of different modalities, different materials, different moods, different forms, and drawing them together through that translational space, I think is very effectively done here, bringing together both Arendt and Nalini's own practice. It is by exercising our right to interpretation, by going back and forth in a dialectical movement, that we live in the realm of the translation between the language of art and the language of ethics. we become caught up in the moving constellational relationship between Arendt and Malani, now who create their own hieroglyph side by side. A translation, Walter Benjamin suggests, is a constellation of form and meaning. And he goes on to say, the relation of what has been to the now is dialectical. Constellations, he says, are not progressive, but image suddenly emergent, and the place where one encounters them is language. Benjamin also goes on to suggest that when you are in the midst of a constellational work, it is always dangerous. It threatens both the burden of tradition and those who receive it. Now, Goethe's concept of Weltliteratur is an exemplary instance, I believe, of a constellated, dangerous cosmopolitanism threatening both the burden of tradition and those who receive it. It is true, of course, that world literature has its limits. Goethe's cosmopolitanism has been critiqued, and I think rightly, for being Eurocentric and profoundly ill-informed about classical Indian poetry, which he famously despised. His pseudo-Persian poetry, like his Pindaric odes and Roman elegies, have been seen as ingenious imitations of the aesthetic forms of foreignness. And yet, I think Goethe saves himself as best he can in his own period from the charges of cultural fetishism and exoticism. What I find particularly valuable in Goethe's world literature for our own times is its wide translatability as a document of the international and interdisciplinary humanities. Weltliteratur is as much about the necessity of working with the foreignness of language and culture as it is about understanding foreign relations in the diplomatic sense, dear Ambassador, in an age in which the sovereignty of the nation is in a phase of transition or incipience, despite the resurgence of nationalism. Goethe's essay reflects on international and intranational relations by emphasizing the priority of cultural translation and performance. The ethics of intercultural affiliation depends, he says, on working within the terms of difference and foreignness that are already, perhaps unconsciously, part of our translational historical conditions of making art and meaning. He writes, "For nations flung together by dreadful warfare and thrown apart again have all realized that they had absorbed many foreign elements and become conscious of new intellectual needs. This leads to more neighborly relations and a desire for a freer system of intellectual give and take." This, I think, is particularly interesting from our perspective, because it takes what is negative. It's that dialectical move of taking what is negative, taking warfare, and saying, if in war we can come up so close to people, even in a spirit of antagonism, their people die, our people die. Their people suffer, our people suffer. If these very intimate things of life and death can be understood during war, then we must be able to translate them in times of peace as an intimacy across differences. Of course, it's an idealistic view, but I think in a world where since 9/11, the world has been at war in more ways than one, we should understand that out of this debris, something can be built along the Goethean invocation. In the spirit of a desire for neighborly relations dedicated to freer systems of intellectual give and take, as Goethe puts it, give and take, again that dialectical movement, I want to share a moment with you when Hannah Arendt suddenly finds herself amongst a group of beleaguered humanists in Trivandrum. A constellation of danger emerges. I must warn you, dear friends, there is a touch of Bollywood patriarchy and paternalism in the story I'm about to tell. A rural damsel in distress, a gallant subaltern knight from the city armed with the answers, and then an old woman, Hannah Arendt's unexpected presence, that doesn't exactly save the day or the damsel, but enables both of them to survive better than they did the day before. I'm not wasting your time, dear friends. This is, I should add, a story very much in tune with the humanistic pedagogies of our own times, cultural translation, traveling theory, the displacement of peoples and ideas, and an emergent epiphany of the right to interpretation. Professor Sundar Sarukkai, familiar I'm sure to you, a renowned Indian philosopher and public intellectual, visited the Trivandrum Women's College in Kerala in 2011 as a member of the board of a national survey on the stature of the humanities. Professor Sarukkai was beset, he says, by humanists, students and teachers in a state of abject insecurity and anguish. He writes, "A thoroughly demoralized group stood before us, besieged by numerous problems ranging from social and domestic tabooing for joining a course in the humanities or social sciences to the problems of poverty, unemployment, and stark uncertainty about the future. A woman student courageously took the floor and voiced her resentment," the professor's report, with a piquant irony. And this is what she said. "Being a Hindu, my parents, teachers, and friends would have pardoned me even if I had eloped with a Christian or Muslim boyfriend, but they couldn't forgive me for deserting pure sciences and joining a humanities course." Yes, it's a joke, but it is a dark joke. It's a black humor. Sarukkai's response to the abandoned women's confession of academic apostasy presents an unexpected challenge. To learn to think like a humanist, he tells his demoralized Trivandrum audience, you should read Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem. I couldn't have made this up even if I had tried. In Trivandrum, the city of the Indian rocket launchpad project in India's first technopark, Sarukkai argues against the curricular privilege afforded, he says, to technical and scientific rationalism by the Indian Constitution, and warns that the hegemony of instrumental knowledge would lead, of course, to the banality of evil, the phrase that Hannah Arendt invented for the book on Eichmann. What Hannah Arendt says about the banality of evil is often misunderstood. I won't go into it now, but I will cite from a late essay that she dedicated to a very close friend, the poet W.H. Auden, which I think is the best description of what she means by the banality of evil. She says, "It is the non-wicked everybody who has no special motives, and for this reason is capable of infinite evil." I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that lecture hall in Trivandrum, or given the heat of the day, a mosquito on the sleepily revolving ceiling fan. In the absence of either of these Kafkaesque choices, I can only ventriloquize what happened. Arendt engages with the banality of evil in her book on Eichmann by tracking the performance of Eichmann's language. And what she says, and I'm now anticipating my argument, is that he could not think dialectically. She says he was full of empty talk, cliches, and language rules with the precision of a philologist following the inane activity of thoughtlessness. Arendt writes, "The longer one listened to him, the more obvious it became that this inability to speak was closely connected with an inability to think, namely to think from the standpoint of somebody else." That, of course, is the ethical center of dialectical thinking, that you put yourself in another place, in a place of alterity, and then work back to who you are and where you stand and what you believe in. To think from the standpoint of someone else requires a convergence between consciousness and moral conscience. Listen to Arendt. "We call consciousness," she says literally, the phrase in Greek is to know with myself, "the curious fact that in a sense I am also for myself, though I hardly appear to me, which is not so unproblematic as it seems. I am not only for others, but for myself, and in this latter case, I am not just one. A difference always exists in my oneness. For myself, this articulating of being conscious of myself, I am inevitably two in one. Consciousness is not the same as thinking. But without this alterity, without this difference of the other inside myself, and then myself side by side with the other, because she's using a metaphor, thinking would be impossible. What does it mean to say then that actualizing the difference within oneself, learning to understand that the foreignness is not outside, that we are also foreign to ourselves, a deep tradition in the German dialectical thinking. This is what Freud suggests when he talks about the unconscious, that there is that otherness within oneself and we are continually having to deal with it, and by dealing with that foreignness within myself, I am open then to the hospitality of other differences. Dialectical thought is not simply about method. It is about the moral interaction with others by looking at the world from the standpoint of someone else, negating yourself in order to find yourself. And when you find yourself, you are not simply yourself. You put yourself in another place, another time, another person's shoes. The populist majoritarian nationalisms that arise amongst our much vaunted global age make it clearer how this process today is not happening. It is a great burden, the idea of mankind today, the collective human figure of rights and representations, has become for the barbarians within our gates an impossible responsibility and obligation. They want to continually shut the gates of alterity, shut the gates of being within oneself, two things in a continual conversation with oneself, shut the gates of dialectical thinking. The phalanx of male leaders that straddle the world today, I don't think I need to name them. There are too many. They are not politicians of charisma. They are politicians of miasma. In the United States and more recently in Brazil, England, India, Italy, Hungary, Poland, and elsewhere, Steve Bannon has become the prime proponent of nationalist barbarism. And this is not my language. It is Bannon's self-avowed description. In a 2018 interview with The Economist, Bannon proudly assumes the mantle of nationalist barbarism. Speaking of the 2016 US elections, he describes his ideological mission with a passion. The country was thirsting for change, he says, and Barack Obama didn't give them enough. I said to Trump, he doesn't say to Trump, but who else? I said, we are going for a nationalist message, we are going to go barbarian, and we will win. So as I said, these are Bannon's descriptions of his form of nationalism, not mine. On March 25th, 2019, after the publication of the redacted Mueller report, Bannon reinforced his earlier message to Trump to go barbarian and goaded him to go, and I quote, to go full animal, with my apologies to animals. The populist slogans, make America great again, make India Hindu again, make Britain Brexit again, are rhetorical instances of this barbaric ethno-nationalism. The traditional tendency is to associate the adjective great with populist chauvinism and the neoliberal hauteur of global capitalism. More lethal by far, in my view, is the rebarbative and violent iteration of the adverb again. If great refers to majoritarian sovereignty and nationalist populist alliances, again references a revanchist temporality of degradation that goes full animal by legitimating a mythical return to a never-achieved state of racial purity. And because it is never achieved and not achievable, it becomes a ferocious and violent demand on others. My friends, in the phrase, "Make America Great Again," the devil is in the details. It's in the again. It's more than it is in the great. The hegemonic greatness of the nation's populist peoples can only be achieved again and again, as we are seeing through persecutory and peremptory acts of rough justice that are themselves contrary to the spirit of the law or justice. Every time I hear "Make America Great Again," or "Make that country or this country great again," I hear the warning that we issued to ourselves after World War II and have not been courageous and have not found it possible to keep to that promise, which is never again. Every time you hear "again," "make it great again," please remember that following on from it will be that condition, "Oh God, never again." Imagine for a moment this scene at the Migrant Processing Center in the Rio Grande Valley on the South Texas-Mexico border, April 2019. Asylum seekers who cross the border legally into the US in compliance with the 1951 Refugee Convention and its incorporation into the US Refugee Act of 1980 are, in a reversal of justice, deemed to be illegal. The administration deliberately slows down the asylum process, separating children from parents. The Trump administration illegally violates the rights of asylum seekers by blocking applicants in Mexico for months, perhaps even years, in violation of the 1997 settlement in the Flores case, which holds that children and families can only be in detention for 20 days. Protections enshrined in the Constitution are violated. Congress and the courts do their best to block the president's executive action, and yet unaccompanied children are deported and separated from their families. As the New York Times put it, very appropriately, the migrants are mostly victims of a broken immigration system. They are not, by and large, killers, rapists, or gang members. Most do not carry drugs. They have only learned how to make asylum claims, just as the law allows them to do. The language we frequently use to discuss the injustices of the immigration system is spatial. Borders, frontiers, walls, cells, detention centers, these are the carceral, prison-like jurisdictions of surveillance. And yet, time, this much more elusive category, time, is now used against space. So, if you want to act extrajudicially, you can just slow down the process. The immiseration of life, the destruction of family life, the destruction of work, the destruction of labor, the destruction of self-respect, now comes simply through the administrative banality of evil, of extending time, of using this much more intangible idea that humanists think about all the time. Time or temporality is used as an instrument of profound injury. Although the humanities are not activists in a traditional sense, they're actively involved in studying the impact of the displacement of cultural values and trajectories of knowledge systems as they migrate from one historical context to another, moving across geographical and territorial spaces, establishing hybrid boundaries. The humanities at their best are committed to the translation of meanings, norms, and beliefs in a dialectical, ethical, and intellectual interaction. The humanities must not break faith with what Adorno, Arendt, and Ernest Bloch would have recognized as disappointed hope. This is no pessimism. Disappointed hope is a realistic response to the value of the small steps we can take when the barbarians are within the gates and the large footprint of tyrannical authoritarianism shadows our paths. Hope will be disappointed. Bloch argues in his magnum opus, The Principle of Hope, because it does not aspire to a simple-minded sense of a future of fulfillment. Hope is not simply utopian and not simply aspirational. For Bloch, like his friend Theodor Adorno, political hope is proleptic. It is to think about the future in order to act in the present. Hope and disappointed hope are anticipatory aspiration, a hope that appeals to a future that is virtual and yet to come, and yet what is virtual is vital to the ways in which we conduct ourselves with the right to interpretation. And that is that space in Nalini's work between the Arendt and the image. That space, that virtual space, is the space of disappointed hope, where we can reinscribe the relationship of art to ethical philosophy. We can reinscribe the relationship of computer technology and what it might be doing to deaden certain aspects while it enhances others, and on the other hand, the notion of the care of the planet, the care of ourselves. Disappointed hope, Bloch proposes, and I quote, is open in a forward direction, in a future-oriented direction. For this reason, hope, while actually, he says, always in a state of suspension, is committed to change rather than repetition. And what is more, it incorporates the element of chance, without which there can be nothing new. Hope is about taking that chance in the present, that risk in the present, without which there is nothing new. And indeed, if you read the testimonies of migrants and refugees, whether they're literary testimonies or documentary testimonies, as I do for the book that I'm writing, that notion of chance and risk is continually there. One Iraqi refugee says, if I knew that there was a 99% chance of the boat I'm on being bombed, I would still take it, because I could have a 1% chance, hopefully, if the instruments of asylum seeking were more humane, I would have a 1% chance of realizing a life of dignity. The time has come in this difficult moment where we have to see dignity not only in the conventional terms that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights holds, that dignity is something we're all born with. Yes, but more important by far is how people take risks in action. In these acts, there is a different kind of dignity in extremis, as I talk about it in my book. That's also, I think, what Hannah Arendt says, that finding the right words at the right time is an action. It is an action for a different kind of dignity in extremis. I want to end on this note of disappointed hope, which I have tried to demonstrate is about chance, it's about taking the risk, it is not about pessimism, with James Baldwin, whose work is an illustration of a humanistic constellation of both danger and awakening, of taking a risk. In this sense, Baldwin stands for me beside Benjamin and Arendt. This is an unusual connection to make so late in my lecture as I end, but what Baldwin shares with Arendt, with Bloch, with Adorno, is his fearless humanist demand for the right to interpret, the concept I've been developing in my book, at a time when being gay and black drove him from his home. He was a refugee of sorts, a refugee of art and love and friendship. With his characteristic fortitude in facing a future which we may never know, but one nonetheless we cannot live without, Baldwin gives us humanists the call for a kind of freedom of the right to interpret, a freedom of a kind of disappointed hope. He says to his nephew, "For this is your home, my friend. Whatever the odds, do not be driven from it. Great men and women have done great things here and will again. And we can then make America what America must become. It will be hard. What America must become. America must be able to see itself from the standpoint of another, the dialectical basis. America must become proleptic. It is in the future, but we must place ourselves in that future to look back onto the present. What America must become is then again also disappointed hope as I tie together the different themes of my talk. What America must become demands the right to reinterpret America. Dear friends, to make America or India or Argentina or Brazil or Russia what these countries must become is the moral and political antithesis of making them great again. And yet Baldwin's conviction that America must become a home for all, however great the intellectual risks, joins his mission to ours, to Hannah Arendt's in Trivandrum, and to mine in Bombay. I end in the hope that we may seek together the future of our places and our peoples in a shared moment of the present, side by side, in which we find the right words at the right time to turn our disappointed hope into some form of action. The dreaded alternative of silence or muteness will be a sign of the victory of violence and human violation. You have given me hope by listening. I hope I have not disappointed you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm most grateful to you. Now there are other things to applaud, but thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.